Okay, cool. Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to any part of the world you are in. And then welcome to STAG Meetup. I know we have been waiting for this meetup for a very long time. And then there were many factors that we were trying to do. This year, we wanted to start with an in-person meetup. And then for some reason, the venue was available, not available when our speakers were available. So hence we kept on switching between dates, and then eventually we decided, okay, we'll continue having it online. So as our first speaker of the year, we have Mesut Durukal, who is based in Sydney. He is a very profound software tester, quality owner, hiring manager, and chapter lead. And then he is a frequent international speaker. And he had a list of topics to talk about. And then testing as a service seemed like a good pick. And then he has agreed to give us a talk about it. So, Mesut, over to you. Please tell us about yourself, enlighten us with your topic.
Hey, Vikas, thank you. We just had a little chat with you before we start. We talked about the difference, the weather difference, and the other difference between Japan and Australia. And then you said me that I'm based in Sydney. So, little correction: I'm based in Japan now. I'm in Tokyo, but we are still very close. So, thanks for the introduction and thanks for inviting me. I believe this will be a good and insightful session for all of us. So I can tell my story and maybe I can learn from the audience. So you can, if you have any questions, please leave that in the chat. Or if you have any other feedback or comments or thoughts, please feel free to share it. So today we will a little bit talk about testing as a service. So what I mean is, as a terminology, we can have different understanding for testing as a service. Like it can be interpreted as a cloud service, which can be reached from the APIs of the service or any other format. But basically, what I'm planning to share today is the mentality of testing as a service, like how to serve other people, how to share what we have done to other people. It can be in any form, like it can be a set of APIs, it can be a set of UIs, or it can be just a dependency, like we put in to any repository and people can just download or pull. So we will discuss in detail, but first of all, let me very briefly introduce myself. As you already know, my name is Mesut and I'm originally from Turkey, but for more than 2 years, like 2.5 years, I'm in Japan. And I'm working for Indeed.com. It's basically originally an American company, but I'm in the Japan office, Tokyo office. And I'm a test engineer. I have like 15 years experience in testing. And nowadays, of course, almost like daily basis, we are doing the test automation. We are implementing test cases, we are implementing test packages, and we are trying to execute our test cases. In the beginning of the conversation, someone was talking about regression tests. So this is what we are doing almost every day, right? We are having some frequent updates, and we try to ensure that these frequent updates do not break any working functionality. This is why we are running regression tests. So this is what we are doing as well in our organization. And of course, we are dealing with flakiness as most of the other testers do. So this will be a part of the talk, like what is the difficulties, what are the challenges, and what are the proposals that I will share to you that we can cope with these kind of challenges in a better way, or maybe in a more efficient way. So let's get started. This is the brief agenda. So we will start, first of all, what are we talking about? What is the problem for, initially? And what is the proposal? What can be the candidate solutions to cope with this kind of problems? And then after, in the first section, after understanding the problem and the solution, then we will discuss how we can implement this. In the second section, we will discuss about the implementation details. And eventually, after we implement, what will be next? So how it will help other people or even ourselves to execute our test cases or perform the other test automation activities or the other testing activities. So we can regard this as like the first part is before, the second part is what and how, and third part is after. So we will see how it looked like before, and after we start testing as a service, how it will look like. Before and after situation we will discuss. So let's get started with the first one. First of all, let's understand what the problem is. So nowadays testing is not easy. It is very difficult. It is challenging because starting from the systems that we are testing, the systems under test. Nowadays, the products that we are developing are really very complex and complicated products. AI is everywhere. So they have lots of different modules and subsystems, and they have lots of different integrations. The products that we are developing are deployed into several platforms, and they're communicating with other platforms as well, other applications as well. So which means we have to test several interfaces, and we have a very comprehensive scope to be covered. Of course, in a very little time, we have the time constraint as well. So scope, time, quality, cost, these are the constraints for us. These are the difficulties of testing. And of course, we are doing agile most of the time nowadays instead of like the traditional methods like waterfall or the other methodologies. So which means we are very open for changes. Again, we just discussed about regression testings and frequent updates. So sometimes the behaviors are updated. So we have to keep our test cases up to date according to the up-to-date behaviors. Otherwise, we would be covering some previous behaviors which were already updated and changed. So this requires a continuous maintenance on the test cases. And apart from the behavior change, sometimes the tests just start failing. Maybe the web pages that we are testing, the layouts are changed or updated by the development teams, or maybe the behaviors are updated, or for any reason, the tests may start failing. So we have to fix them. We have to apply our changes or fixes. So the main problem and the main difficulty here is if we have lots of different duplication, like if we have some repeated code, then we have to change all of them when we need to apply a fix, right? For example, let me give you an example. If we have a login algorithm in our system, and in our test spec files, if we implement the login steps, then if the login algorithm is changed by the development teams, like normally if we are maybe passing our credentials like the username or the password, and if they just change to attaching to a token, then we have to change our login steps, right? And if this login step is repeated in all test spec files, what we have to do is just go to all the spec files and change all the steps or all the code blocks which have to be updated. And of course, what is the solution for this is removing the duplication. Like if we somehow generate some reusable test code, like by utilizing the helper classes or any other reusable code, then we would be minimizing or eliminating the duplication. So this is basically the problem and the solution that we will discuss. But first of all, let me illustrate this with a concrete example. It will be helping us to better understanding the problem. So in this case, I have a test case. Actually, it is not an end-to-end test case. It's a very small scenario, like only one or two steps. In this scenario, people are going to a website or a web page and finding an element on the page, and which is a button, and then just clicking this. So there is only one operation or interaction with the page. After finding the element, click operation. We have only one step. And then after clicking, we have an assertion, which is checking the label on the click and trying to match this label, which we read, which is the actual result, with the expected result. Normally, we want to see a specific text or a string value on the button. So this is the expected value for us. So the assertion for us is after reading the actual value, we try to assert by matching with the expected result. So there's only one interaction and one assertion. So even in this very small and simple scenario, what we can see on the slide is these four different profiles are following different implementation ways to perform this test step. All of them are doing the same thing. All of them are performing the same test steps, but in different implementation ways. So what is the problem here? I'm not saying that they cannot perform different ways. Of course, it is possible, but it will raise some potential issues and some potential risks. For example, there is no standard, right? Everyone is following their own approach. So maybe some of them have or might have some test smells or some code quality issues. For example, there are some anti-patterns that we know that we have to avoid. But if everyone is following their own approach, it would be difficult to guarantee that we are avoiding the anti-patterns. But what is the alternative solution that we can discuss is, instead of implementing this scenario from scratch, if we already implement this solution, and if we already have this to share with the other people, then we can provide this solution and they can start using this provided solution. And we would be already knowing that this solution is already carefully reviewed and try to eliminate it from the anti-patterns or the test smells, and it will be already providing a good solution. So what would be the advantages of the targets that we are trying to reach after using this testing as a service, or the libraries or dependencies or the solutions that we will share with the other people? We will be developing some standards. Everyone is not will not be following their own approach, but at least we will know what everyone is implementing their test cases, in what way they are implementing their test cases. And again, if there are any issues or code quality issues or other like performance or other things that we have to fix, then we would be already solving this. So we would be avoiding already the anti-patterns. And we would be removing the duplication, right? This is maybe one of the most important things. For example, the code duplication we already discussed. But apart from that, there is the duplication of effort as well. Everyone is trying to implement the same scenario from scratch. It was very small and simple scenario, but think about complex and complicated problems. Everyone will try to solve some problems. But if we already have it in place, then we can just share. Because this is one thing that I frequently realize in my organizations, especially in the big companies. Whenever I face with a problem, sometimes after some time, I learned that it is solved in some other teams. And they just said that, oh, okay, we had solved this in another situation or in another case. But I was still trying to solve this from scratch. So, of course, information sharing is not easy always, especially in the big companies or organizations. So there can be these kind of duplicated efforts or problems that we want to solve or try to solve, which were already handled in other teams or other organizations. And eventually, not only the functional aspects, but also if we want to share these kind of solutions, we can add some other functionalities. Like maybe we can provide some monitoring functionalities, we can provide some dashboards or graphs or charts. And in this way, people not only execute their test cases, but perform some continuous monitoring activities as well. This will be the other benefit when we share these kind of testing resources or the platforms that we can use to support our testing activities. In the meantime, let me check if there is any question. I guess not as of now. So I'll move on, but even if we have a question, I can stop and we can discuss and then continue. But I guess eventually we will have a Q&A session at the end. Anyways. So let's move on. So this is the problem and the solution. But what should be our roadmap to achieve these targets? First of all, we have to define our objectives, and maybe we can define some key metrics. Then we can understand if we are going in the correct direction or not. Somehow we have to measure the quality. We will discuss about this. But let me just say that measuring quality is really very tough, because we are talking about something which is not concrete. Like, how can you measure quality? It doesn't have a unit. Like we cannot measure it in like kilograms, meters. Like, you know what I mean? We need some OKRs and some different metrics. And after analyzing them in a comprehensive way, then we can have some understanding or some insights about the quality. But it is not trivial. We need some comprehensive continuous monitoring activities. And of course, we need the requirements. First of all, we have to define our architecture and the structure of the testing environment that we will share with the other people. So for that, we can talk with several people, several parties, and collect requirements. And then after prioritizing them, we can start with the most fatal ones or the most prior ones. So let me share how we did this in our project. So these are the metrics that we have discussed to track. It is almost fully aligned with the DORA metrics, which were introduced by Google, I think, recently. So basically, the metrics that we can follow are the deployment frequency, like how often we are deploying our product, and what is the lead time, like how much time we need or we spend to deploy or a release candidate. And then what is the change failure rate? Like whenever we run a build, how often it is failing, or what is our like flakiness rate, we can say. And then eventually related to this, mean time to recover. Like if we have a failure, then how much time we need to apply our fix. This is the DORA metrics, which is becoming more and more standard in the community. So the looking from more from the testing perspective, we define some metrics and we categorize them into two major categories. The first one is related to the confidence. What I mean by confidence is, as a quality assurance, what we are trying to do is to improve our confidence to provide the correct product. What does correct product mean? It is related to the verification and the validation, right? It is not only verification, but what we are doing validation as well. So all the functionalities should be working correctly, but the product itself or the functionalities itself should be the correct scope, which the end user is waiting for. So these are the verification and the validation aspects of quality. And in these terms, the metrics that we are following are the coverage, because if there's any coverage gap, like if there is a functionality or the specification which is not covered by the test cases, then we can figure out which of them are not covered and what are the reasons. Like maybe we have some testability issues. This is why we are not covering those specifications. So in this case, if we build like a traceability matrix, it would be very, very helpful to figure out the coverage gaps. But coverage itself is not enough, because let's say I have 100 test coverage. Can I say that all is good, like test is perfect? I cannot say that, right? Because it is only the quantity, it is only the percentage of specifications or the requirements covered by the test case. But how about the quality of the tests? Which means the capability of the test cases that I designed to find the issues. So if they are not capable of finding the issues in time, what we will have is the escape bugs. The issues which were not found by the test cases, but raised in the production environment and reported by the customers. So to understand how capable my test cases are to find the issues, we were tracking the escaped issues, and we were trying to understand in what kind of or what type of bugs we are having mostly, which were escaped from the test cases. So in that regard, we were trying to improve our the quality of our test cases. On the other hand, these are all about the confidence. But on the other hand, the other aspect, which is very important, is the speed in terms of delivery, right? Because if we are too slow, then we would be running behind of the schedule, or maybe the customers would give up waiting for our services. So in these terms, of course, the automation rate is important, because most of the time the automated tests are running faster than the manual testing. Not always, but most of the time. And at least we can do some parallel runs. So automation coverage is important in a way. This is one thing that we are tracking. But of course, again, similarly, even if I have 100% automation rate or automation coverage, it doesn't mean that my tests are running super efficiently. Maybe some of them are running slowly. So the automation duration, individual test automation duration, is another metric that we are tracking. And we are doing some timing analysis. And if we figure out that some tests are running slowly, then we were trying to understand what is the root cause for this. If there are any dummy weights, or if there is any redundant code which can be eliminated. So we were doing these kind of improvements. And apart from this, the implementation rate and apply to time to apply our fixes are other metrics. And of course, the false alarms, which is the rate of the flaky tests. Like some tests are failing, and some of them may fail from the issues stemming from the product itself, but some of them may fail from the test issues, like the test smells or any other code quality issues stemming from the test automation framework. So these are called the tests which should be fixed by the quality assurance team or the testing team. And this is one thing that we are tracking to figure out the rate of false alarms compared to the whole rate of failing tests. So moving on, after that, I said that we have to collect some requirements. So we talked to several teams, like we tried to understand what kind of difficulties or challenges they had. And after collecting all of this and doing an analysis, we listed our requirements, like what kind of components or what kind of specifications or functionalities we need in the test automation framework. We collected the requirements. I'm not expecting you to read all of this. It is just the idea that we need to list our requirements. In this way, we can have a rough plan and we can think about all the aspects of the test automation framework that we will develop. And then we will start implementation. But I guess there is a scope creep. Yes, there is some comments in the chat. Scope creep is one type of test smell. Flakiness is another one. Fragile test is another one. So if you go and do a literature survey, you will find more than 100 types of test smells. So there are lots of them we can figure out. Of course, there are a lot of static code analysis tools that we can use, like we can just integrate into our IDs, or we can set up some servers to do this kind of static code analysis. And of course, the peer reviews will help us to understand and figure out all these kind of test smells. Test automation lifecycle is a superset of both STLC and STLC. Yeah, they are very similar. Like we start with planning, and then we design, and we do some definitions, descriptions, and we do the implementation, execution, and continuous maintenance. This is almost applicable to all these kind of life cycles. And how do you measure the ratio of automation coverage? So basically, we prepare a list, like listing all the test cases, and then we just mark which of them are already automated and which are waiting for automation. This can be done in any platform. Like you can basically use an Excel file or a spreadsheet file, but of course you can use test management tools as well. For example, like if you are using TestRail or TestLink, and on the test cases, there's a field you can mark as automated or still manual. So in that case, you can generate some reports. This will give you the automation ratio. How do you minimize the false failure percentage when the tests are flaky and when you get different percentage on everyone? Yeah, it depends. Like if we have some flakiness, then we have to understand what is the root cause for this flakiness. Like maybe tests are written in a way which is not the best for our product, for our system under test, or we can like improve our implementation in a way. So it depends. First of all, we have to understand the root cause. Why the test cases are flaky? Why sometimes passing and sometimes failing? Normally, if the specification or if the feature is working stable, then the test case should pass every time, right? So if it is failing one time or passing one time, then it might be a timing issue. So maybe we can increase the wait times, of course, under the acceptable range. Like if we are waiting for the responses for half an hour, maybe it would not be acceptable, right? But we have to understand the requirements. And until the maximum acceptable waiting time, we can set our waits, and we can apply our fixes. But first of all, we have to understand why the test cases are flaky. So let's move on, and if there are some further questions, we can discuss. After discussing the problems and the solutions and our roadmap, let's discuss how we can achieve this. How we can, in what ways we can implement this solution and we can share to different people or teams. First of all, let me share you a very basic and example test automation environment. I guess most of the people are somehow involved in test automation activities, so you should be familiar with this environment. But let me try to highlight some important points. For example, in this mindset, the basic idea is trying to generate a reusable code, right? Reusable test spec files or test cases. So what I mean is, Okay, let me start with an example, with a real life example. So I think it would be much more easier to understand. Now, the company that I'm working for is a job seekers company, which means all the job seekers can go to different websites and perform some job queries. Like, I'm searching for the engineer jobs in Sydney City. Let's say I pass two parameters or two arguments. One is the keyword, like I'm searching the engineer jobs, and the other is the location. So I have two text fields, and I will click the button to perform a job search. This is cool. This is good. But the thing here is, as a company or as an organization, we don't have only one website. For example, there is one website which is simply hired.com. There is another one which is townwork.net, for example. And there are several of them. Like there are maybe 9, 10 websites that we are creating. Why? Because the target people, like some I guess if I'm not wrong, one name for the one of the websites is simply nurses.com, because it is only including the nurse or healthcare jobs. So the target people and the target scope is different for all these websites. This is why we have several websites. And for example, for the part-time jobs, the people or the students can go to another specific website, or the engineers can go to another website. So these websites are designed for different targets or different scope. But the use flow that I just described, like going to this web page and performing a search, can be applicable to all websites. So if I want to execute one test case, like performing a search, I can implement one test case. I will implement only one test case, and this test case can be executable on all the websites. So what I'm doing is, I'm not implementing this test case in all the repositories of these different websites. I have only one repository in where I keep my test code, and those different websites, or let's say those different systems under test, are calling the test from my repository. So the test inside my repository is re-executable and reusable. So I'm doing this in a way like generating the variables in a dynamic way. Like if I just use a embedded code, like even the URL of the website, just inside the test code, then it will be going to a specific website, right? But what I'm doing is I'm reading the config files. For example, if website number 1 is calling my repository, then I'm reading the URL from that site, and I'm dynamically generating this URL to navigate. And similarly, if my test execution is triggered from the website number 2, then I'm generating my URL to navigate according to the URL of the website number 2. So I'm generating all the variables and environmental variables that I will use after reading the config variables and other dynamically generating files. So the first thing is, all these multiple applications under test can call my repository. So I have a workflow here, and it can be triggered by timely scheduled jobs, or even if we have a commit, then it can trigger the test executions. What happens next? It just calls the test runner, and the test runner just scans all the spec files and includes all the tests to be included in this suite. Because normally I can have several test spec files, like let's say I have 100 test spec files, but in all executions, I don't want to run all of them, right? For example, I'm having some regression tests. So sometimes I have to select a subset relevant to the deployment, which is done accordingly. Or like maybe I can select only the sanity priority levels of test cases, because I have maybe the smoke level, sanity level, or coverage optional, lots of different priority levels. So if I want to select only a subset, then the test runner will scan the relevantly marked or annotated test cases and will include in the execution scope. And then after this, the text fixtures will run. This is already a good way to remove the duplication, because test fixtures are the blocks which are running before each suite or before each test case, and similarly after each suite and after each test case. So if I move these repeated codes, like we discussed about the login step, login example, right? If it should be done in each test case, then I can simply move to before test block, before each fixture. So it will already help me to remove the duplication. And then, of course, the test will execute and on the browser that I select. Because if we are doing or dealing with the UI automation, I can select any of browser to execute. I will come to this point in a minute because the browser support is very important in terms of UI automation. And then eventually, after the execution is done, we will report the results to the dashboards to be able to do a troubleshooting after the execution is done, right? Because sometimes we just let the job go. For example, we have some nightly jobs. It is just running. And in the morning, when I go to the office or when I start my PC, I realize that some tests are failing. Since I was not there continuously tracking the executions during the test run, I have to be able to understand the root cause of the failure. So this is why reporting is very important. So if I collect all the evidences and artifacts during the execution, then I can upload them to my dashboard. Then I will already see all the artifacts and the execution details, right? For example, I can take some snapshots or the screenshots of the pages whenever the test case failed. Then I can understand if the page was broken or it was not loaded or there was any other issue. It will be very easy for me to understand the root cause of the failure. So this is a general overview of a test automation environment. This is what we will try to build. But for this, of course, we can use several frameworks and tools and libraries, right? For example, for API testing, we can use different libraries, or for UI testing, we can use like maybe Selenium or any other library, Selenite. But maybe we can use some E2E test automation frameworks as well, like Cypress, Playwright, Test Cafe. Any of them can work for us. But here, what I want to highlight is the decision for the tool or the library that we are using is very important. Because, again, let me give you an example from a real-life scenario. When I first joined to my project, I realized that they already decided to use one of those E2E test automation frameworks. And then, after talking to product owners in Japan, people really love using macOS or iOS operating systems, which means I learned that at least half of the traffic is coming from Safari browsers. And then I learned that the framework which was decided to be used in our automation environment did not support WebKit or Safari automation. So we were basically running on Chrome, and we did not cover the Safari execution, which is the most important in our case. So the point is, if we decide on a tool or framework which is not appropriate for our requirements, then we will have some issues and some problems or drawbacks. Not only the functionalities that I support or the browser that they support, but for example, the execution speed or the execution performance. Are we sure that it is really the best or the fastest tool or the framework that are running our test cases? So did we do a benchmarking to understand which one is more suitable for us? So we can talk about a decision criteria like the support of different features or speed or performance. But the most important point is, first of all, try to understand our requirements. What kind of execution environments we need? What kind of test cases we will implement? For example, do we need to open a new tab or open a new page, open a new window? Or do we have to deal with alerts or pop-up windows? Because these are kind of tricky features. All of the frameworks do not support them. So these kind of tricky features, if we have, then we can try to understand which one is appropriate for our requirements. So this is what we did before starting the implementation of the testing as a service. I chose one test scenario, and I implemented that scenario with all of the alternatives. And then, of course, I already had a developer experience. And of course, I measured the execution duration. And I tried to figure out if they can support even in desktop version and mobile version as well. For example, if I easily change the headers in the requests, right? For example, to simulate the mobile testing, sometimes you just change the window size, but sometimes it's not enough if the systems that are testing is not responsive. You have to adapt your request headers as well. So in that case, capturing the request and modifying the request and the responses is very important. So all these kind of requirements that you need should be investigated in detail, and the best tool should be selected accordingly. Moving on. After we chose our architecture, and after we choose the tools and the libraries that we will use in our architecture and the environment, then of course there are some quality aspects that we have to keep in mind. There are lots of different quality aspects because it's not only functionality, we are talking about non-functional aspects as well. So I will a little bit go fast here because even this section, like 3-4 slides, can be a different talk topic. For example, here I listed 16 of them, and if we talk 2 minutes on each of them, we will lose a lot of time. So, but at least I will remind you what kind of aspects we have. So it should be flexible, like whenever we have to scale to any other platform or whenever we have to execute our test cases in any other execution environment. Of course, the framework or the environment that we are using should be supporting these kind of changes. And of course, it should be reliable. We are already discussing a lot about the flaky test, right? So it should be reliable. For example, what reliable means? Like if it is reporting, it is not only about the failures, it is also about the passes as well. For example, if a test case passes, then I should be relying on the test result. It should be really passing. Because if the test case fails, and if it is not a real failure, then it's a false alarm, right? This is straightforward. This is what we know. But on the other hand, similarly, there is another case which we call a silent horror case. Like the test case passes, and then I'm not aware of any other issues, right? Because the tests do not report any failure. But if, in fact, there is an issue which the test case is not capable of finding, then we call these kind of situations as silent horror cases. So there is a potential risk, but I'm not aware of this because the test just passes. So reliable is very important. And of course, we can talk about the monitoring and different metrics that we can measure. So we can talk about coverage of the framework. And of course, it should be letting me do all the reporting stuff. So it should be available for troubleshooting. And of course, the performance, like we just discussed. If the tests are running very slowly, or similarly, if it is using a lot of resources, like I can, in a way, do my execution very fast. But if I'm using a lot of resources, like, of course, we can do some parallel runs, but why should I do like 20 virtual machines, right? Normally, maybe I can do only 1 or 2 with the same speed. So, of course, the resource consumption is another aspect of the performance. So let me skip the details of this. And I will move to the third part, which is after we implement this, like we decide the architecture and we decide the tools and the other libraries that we will use, and we will keep in mind the quality aspects, and then we implement some solutions, and we will serve this to other people as a service. And then what? What happens next? So this will be our last section that we will discuss. But I'm stopping for a while just to check the questions if we have already. I guess not. Okay. So if no further questions, let's move on and see what happens if I serve this solution. I will go to people and say that, guys, I implemented something. I want to share with you. Please use it. If they use this, what happens? What advantage they will have from using this testing as a service? Let's see. So what I was promising is it will, of course, speed up the implementation. For example, if I provide this solution, the people can be easily implementing their test cases or test scenarios, their test automation. Why? Because before using this, I realized there are some challenges. For example, like if you are doing the web automation, first of all, you have to figure out where the elements or the components are, right? For example, when we are doing manually the UI testing, what we do is by our eyes, visually, we see where the buttons are, where the text fields are. So we locate, right? By our eyes, visually, we locate where the elements are. And then we interact with the pages. But if we let the PC, if we let the automated script run, it should also locate where the element is. So we call these kind of locators or selectors as the basic pointers of the test code to find the elements or the components. So we should define. Sometimes it's very easy. If you just go and inspect the web page, you will see the source code, and you will see maybe the class names or the class IDs or even maybe the expats of the elements. But sometimes it's not that much straightforward. Sometimes, for example, you are dealing with lists and you have to locate a list item with a specific string or name, and then you have to read the other strings or maybe the parent element and then go back again to the children. So sometimes you have to do some trick operations. So defining the locators might be a time consuming task. And even after defining the locators, we will continue with the other implementing the other algorithms. Sometimes we have some algorithms to be implemented in our test automation environment, right? So this is one more thing that we will be consuming some time. And of course, to do all the steps in our test execution or the test scenario, there are lots of different alternatives which are basically doing the same thing. But sometimes we have to decide one of them. For example, I left some examples here. All of them are some equivalent ways to perform the same steps. But of course, they are all not performing with the same performance. Sometimes you have to analyze which is best or which is less prone to errors. So you have to go with the best implementation way. So this is what I'm promising by providing a testing as a service. So all these alternatives would be already analyzed, and the best would already be chosen inside the test automation framework, which is provided to other people as a service. And let's see what it will look like after people start using this service. So on the left-hand side, I have a one test case, which was written or implemented from scratch. Everything is inside the spec file. And on the right-hand side, I just provide my framework as a dependency, and they just pull them into their projects and just call the relevant method, which is basically doing the same thing on the with the code written on the left-hand side. So we just call the relevant method and we just call our arguments. Like this is the example that I described to you, just going to a website and performing a search by passing the arguments, the keyword and the location arguments. So this can be done by just calling the relevant method. Of course, in that point, of course, the documentation of the framework is very important, because if the users do not understand which methods or which functions to use, then of course it can be even more difficult to write their own code, right? So the usability and the ease of understandability or the ease of use is very important. This is why we had some non-functional aspects as well to keep in mind before starting our implementation, and even after we implement our test, because we have to keep doing the continuous maintenance. If there is any missing documentation, or if there is any point that we have to fix or change in a way to improve the performance, then we can continue with our continuous maintenance. And let's see if what I promised was really performed. I tried to understand if I was in the correct direction. So I measured. So I implemented a test scenario without using the testing as a service, the relevant framework, and with using this. So how much time did I spend without using the framework, and how much time did I spend by using the framework? So these are the measurements that I had. I realized that, and I create different subtasks for each of them, and I put some labels, and then I export from our issue tracking system. In my case, it was Jira. And after I filter out only the relevant tasks by reading the labels, then I read the timestamps where the status of the subtask was changed from like accepted to in progress, and from in progress to done. So in this case, I can understand how much time I was spending for the implementation itself. So these are the metrics that I get. Before I start using the testing as a service, I was spending 5 hours in average for a number of test cases, like maybe 10, 20 test cases. I measured all the metrics. And in average, I figured out it was almost like 5 hours, 2 hours for the locators, creating the locators files and applying all the patterns that I want to apply, like page object model or any other pattern. This part was taking around 2 hours, and the other implementation of the test scenario was taking around 3 hours. But then, after I start using this, it was only 30 minutes in average for a number of test cases. So this is already showing a huge benefit of using the testing as a service, and it will already give us a opportunity to improve our ease of implementation. And eventually, after using this to collect the metrics and do the continuous monitoring, of course, we generate several dashboards, and we export our metrics into these dashboards, because we are talking about some numbers or any other raw data to collect metrics. And they're already great. They are telling a lot of stories and information to us. But sometimes analyzing and interpreting the raw data is not that much easy. So if we transform them into some graphs, like maybe charts or trends, line graphs, it would be much more straightforward to understand what's happening in my environments. So this is why we generate several dashboards, and visually we could see what was happening, like what kind of environmental values was increasing in time, or what other resource consumptions we had, or what were the response times of our products and the web pages in our products. All these kind of metrics we were able to understand from the monitoring dashboards. So I left just a few examples to give you an idea about how the monitoring dashboards look like. Yeah, so we can generate several types of graphs and charts. And what else? Of course, we discussed about the documentation. Yes, Vikas, please go ahead.
I have a question. So, my understanding is like you are emphasizing on the fact that create the test methods as generic as we can, and then instead of telling tests to do specific thing, make them generic, and then pass certain parameters so that we can reuse them on multiple platforms or multiple applications.
Exactly.
And then do you think adding a cloud capability is one such capability, or is there something when we say as a service, are we adding some other dynamic mechanism where when it can uh, say test a particular functionality on the fly or something like that?
I mean, testing on the fly a particular functionality, this is what I did not try yet, but it
Hmm.
might be possible.
Hmm.
But the basic idea in this study
Hmm.
was exactly how you described, like make it as generic as possible
All right.
and try to exclude all the execution parameters to the config values or the other external parameters, and
Right.
then make it generic to everyone to be executable for in each platforms and different environments.
Right. Okay, so I have a add-on question. Maybe I'll wait till the end, like once you finish the next session. Yeah.
Sure, sure.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, actually we are almost done. So one part of the continuous maintenance is the training, because we have to provide support and the documentation and the other help that or the assistance they need. So sometimes we can do some meetings, maybe online meetings, or some like other trainings and the relevant documentation. And eventually, we will continue to support them upon their change or other requests. So let's wrap up what we have discussed. So we discussed about building a testing as a service. It can be in any form, like it can be a cloud service, which can be reached by APIs or other interfaces. But in this case, what I have done is I just implemented the framework, and I published this as a library. And people can just pull this into their own projects as a dependency, and they can execute the functions or the methods built inside this framework by passing their own parameters or the arguments. And all these cases, test cases are executable in several environments, like they are supporting the mobile executions and supporting different browsers on which they wanted to be executed. And in that regard, we discussed, first of all, analyzing the requirements and the problems that we have, and the ways, the basic mindset, which is the removing the duplication and trying to generate reusable test code, which is as generic as it can be. And then we discussed about the implementation ways, like how we can structure our architecture and how we can include other tools or libraries inside this environment. And eventually, we discussed about some monitoring activities and some metrics that we can track, and in which dashboards or other monitoring platforms we can continuously monitor. So this was the basic flow of building a testing as a service. And now I guess we would have some time to questions and answers. I guess there's already one, which is, are there any tutorials or boilerplate projects on how to make this support util package? It is not public yet. We just published in our organization. So of course there are some tutorials and some other projects supporting this util functions. But maybe in time we can make it even public, but not yet. Any other questions or thoughts or feedback?
Okay, I have a question. So you were talking about different website and different environments.
Yeah.
Like I understand the concept of environment property file, which you can control URLs.
Yeah.
But what do you do with the test data, and also what do you do with the obviously each website has different skin.
Yeah.
And different forms and different elements identified, unless it's the same website but just has different background.
Yes.
So how does it look, and how do you control all this sort of parameter switch but mainly test data and then the element identification? Yeah.
Excellent question. Thanks for raising this. I think I forgot to mention about this. So test data is one thing, and the different structure of different websites is the second part. So let me start from the second part, the locators. If the behaviors or the use cases are common on different websites, but if the page structures are different, then what we will do? So ideally, we try to introduce some unique IDs. For example, their maybe class names or IDs or XPaths can be different. But if I add a unique ID, like data test ID, to every component on each website, then this unique ID would work for each of them. And not only to make it reusable, but also it will improve the flakiness as well. For example, there was one previous question, right? For example, in terms of the flakiness. Sometimes they just change the layout of the page and our test cases are broken because basically the XPath or the class paths or the class names are updated. But if we use these kind of unique IDs, even if the layout is changed, then it would be there. But still, if not, even maybe the unique IDs is somehow not available, or in a way, if they are still different, then even the locators I'm generating conditionally. Like I have a class for the locators, and I'm trying to read the locator for an element, right? So if I'm trying to get the locator when I'm testing website number 1, then it is a condition for me. So the locator function will return me the relevant locator. But if I'm calling this function when I'm executing the website number 2, then the relevant function will return me another, because it will read the condition, like it can read the config file and it can read the execution environment, for example. So if it is website number 1, then return this locator, and if it is number 2, then return the other one. And about the test data, the other part of the question, actually it is similarly. So we generate the test data pool. So we did a data-driven testing approach. So of course you can execute the same test case by providing several different data. So we start managing the test data with just a file, XML file, but then after some time, we developed an API for this. So you basically just call the endpoints in the API to generate some data, and these APIs were just returning the relevant data that you need. Yes, thanks. Does this answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, I understand it's a bit complicated because I used to work for equivalent website in Australia, like on Seek.com, like it's one of the Indeed competitors.
Oh, I
And so we had this, problems. Like, but we never, well, it's always the same website, but obviously different, moving from one environment to another.
Yeah.
So not only URL change, but you have to get the different data and the subset that has to be supported all throughout the search engine and sort of key value pairs and synonyms and relevancy.
In that regard, developers should be supportive. This is the importance of breaking the silos between teams. For example, whenever I raise this issue, like, guys, I'm working with different teams, and I want to introduce some unique IDs whenever you develop a new page. So in that regard, developers should be supporting you. They should understand the problem here, and they should accept your proposals. I mean, of course, you should convince them with some good outcome and the other advantages. But the collaboration is very important, especially in that regard. Any other questions?
I think we had a raised hand from Yura.
Yeah, hi.
Please
Hope
go
you
ahead.
can hear me okay. Yeah, thank you for the talk. That was great. Yeah, I also noticed you on your website in the travel section. You haven't been to Australia yet, so hopefully you will be able to visit us
I'm
sometime.
hoping as well, hopefully in the near future.
And you already touched on APIs, but I was just wondering when you test the website, because I just started developing my own, and like, would you test them together, or are they totally separate things, API and the actual HTML and stuff?
Yeah, I didn't talk too much about API, but what we did in our study, in this case, we discussed about this, like we should maintain or manage the API and UI together or in separate packages. And eventually what we decided is to manage them separately. Because most of the time, like these modern end-to-end test automation frameworks support both API and UI testing. Like if you use Cypress, you can do both API and UI testing, or if you use Playwright, you can do both. But they are mostly optimized to do the UI testing. So if you want to do only API testing, you can just, without using any of these frameworks, you can just generate your own functions to call the backend endpoints. And I guess you can manage much more easily if you have a separate package.
Yep, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, Vikas, please.
Yeah, Mesut, I have a question. Like in recent time, not in recent past, like I had created an automation framework that was so efficient that I didn't have to write a single line of code. So I could replicate it for future web applications.
Mm-hmm.
But still, the way I kind of implemented was like to tell you about the maintenance or the robustness of that framework was there was an accessibility issue that there was a lot of change that the developers had to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, the whole structure in many ways, whole the DOM of the web applications had changed. But then because the framework was written very well, I didn't have to change a single line of code.
Mm-hmm.
Now with this, how do you think, is there a way that we can have this hosted as a service,
Mm-hmm.
like as a cloud-based service where anybody can pick this and then maybe call certain APIs and then have their tests automated?
Yeah, another great question. Thanks. So I guess I can relate this to version management. For example, let's suppose I serve this to different people and they start using this, and after some time, they require some more functionality, like or they require some changes
Mhm.
upon the changes on their systems, like accessibility changes or other changes.
Mhm.
And then at that time, they can require these changes, and we can prepare a new release. So it will be a new version for me. Because normally I published already a version, it's already available. But then after changing or applying all these changes, I can prepare another release, and it will be another version for me. But of course, backward compatibility is very important in that regard. But we can manage this in the scope of version management, I guess.
Cool. And maybe a question to all, like, has anybody has such an implementation where tests are hosted on a cloud, and then you don't really have to write code, but then you just call certain um, say APIs, and then you run your tests, like anybody?
Because we never had anything like that, but what we had the npm package as a like test framework, which you can actually public, for example, you can actually install this package as a boilerplate, for example, like make it simple, and then it has basic functionality, basic methods, interaction method, and then you can actually have, as soon as you start using this package, you can enhance it on your side and have a custom methods. In this case, you sort of have a half job already done. You just you utilize what's already there, and whoever's managing this package can improve if they want to. If they don't want to, just keep us fixed version. You don't have to upgrade your framework as well. So you just use one fixed version and sort of stick to it.
Awesome. Could you please share the name of the package?
Yeah, it's pretty much all the. I talked to you probably offline. Yeah, so basically it's we used in Tabcorp. If you like, it was protractor stuff. Obviously, a bit deprecated, but it was made public for people to use. I'll send you the link.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Is it already deprecated? I think it would be next year. Or
I think it was deprecated December last year. We're still using it. We're transitioning to a new framework. We're transitioning to WebDrive.io. Again, similar concept. We're trying to create an npm package, but it's not public. I think it's because it's proprietary, like
very similar.
Yes, basically. But if you do it in your own time, you probably can. It comes down to company policy. They don't want to release anything developing house to the public, just in case.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks, Leon. I think that's a good way to put it. Like you can probably have a package instead of having it as a cloud-based service. So which is kind of a local version of
Yeah, I mean, again, if you're using JavaScript, if you're using something else, you can have like different type of like external packages which you can utilize it.
Absolutely.
We also have some NuGet packages that we developed for our frameworks, and those packages we actually published in our like a common repo, like for example Selenium common functions, and that package has been used by different repo in our solution. So that is what we have implemented currently.
Cool.
And like Mesut said, like we are maintaining the version every time and also publishing the newer version if we have the same different methods or any changes in the methods like that. So yeah, we're also doing the same stuff. Yes.
Awesome.
Oh, great. Seems like a lot of people doing this approach.
Yep.
Yeah, but it is basically kind of NuGet because my organization is a .NET based application they have. So everything is within the Microsoft and Azure and everything. So yeah, it's kind of NuGet package, but it's a customized one according to our framework. Yeah. And we have 3 different type of NuGet packages, one for CRM, FinOps, and a different web application as well. Yeah, so it is actually saving a lot of time, and we found it is a best way to manage our repo in terms of maintainability and maintenance. Yes.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because as you told, it's kind of local because normally we publish in a repository, but that repository is behind the VPN. So it's not
Right.
public to everyone,
Right.
but at least inside the company, everyone can download and use it.
Right. Awesome. Awesome. Cool. So any other questions? Anyone?
Yeah, so Mesut, I just want to ask you like how this test as a service is different from what we are doing currently, like developing packages and reusing in our repos. So how it is going to be different in terms of test as a service? Because anyways, we are maintaining the common libraries and function, and
Mhm.
being main thing what I say is the code reusability across our repos. So how we kind of differentiate and how we make it more useful for our applications. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can basically interpret this again as just preparing a package and deploying or publishing for the usage of other people. But what we are trying to do here is, on top of all the other functionalities, we are trying to include some services for monitoring as well, and we generate some dashboards in where using people using this framework can report. So in this way, both the test execution and the continuous monitoring would be supported, and the tests themselves are tried to be done as generic as possible. So the main idea to develop test cases is increasing the reusability, but not too different from what you
Yeah.
described. Yeah,
Because those things like the dashboard maintaining and everything, I can do and publish a very good report in Azure as well,
yeah, sure.
or like different extent reports or anything, customized reports as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, what I found very interesting is uh, like the application is calling your repo
Uh-huh.
is going to be a very different uh, like I'm not sure how it's gonna work, because in terms of locators and all other XPath and everything, it seems very quite challenging and complex to me if we have a very huge application in place. But yeah, that like triggering our repo when for a different application is somewhat I found it really interesting in
Yeah.
that session. Yeah.
Yeah, even the workflow is also reusable. So we are using GitHub Actions.
Mm-hmm.
So you can create some reusable GitHub Actions. So these workflows can be called from any
Okay.
repository.
Yeah. All right.
And let me say one more thing. For example, as you told, you can use any custom reporter as well. For example, at first, we think about using Allure reporter. But then, for example, let's say I'm using this framework and I'm reporting by using Allure. And you are using this and you are reporting. But in that case, these reports would be separated from each other. So we could not do a comprehensive monitoring. But
Mhm.
if we report to the same dashboard, everyone, then we can do a global monitoring as well.
Okay. Yeah.
This was one advantage that we chose this approach.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, guys? I think many people are dropping off. So before everybody's gone, I would like to thank Mesut for that wonderful session. It was really interesting, and then you touched upon various interesting aspects of testing and test automation. Thanks for that.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you all for asking wonderful questions. It was really like I could see that you were all ears to Mesut's talk. And of course, it was a wonderful talk, hence it's both reciprocative and really good questions there. And if you want to stick around, please feel free to. Like I think Mesut, would you be able to spend a few more minutes?
Sure,
If there are
sure,
any further questions?
sure.
Okay, I know it's evening, so maybe late for your family time. Thanks those who could join, and then if you want to stick around, please feel free to stick around. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, and, Masood, I had a question. Like, how many times, like, do we, I know it's a very Silicon Valley thing that they come up with these solutions which are available for all, like be it Selenium or Playwright or whatever, right? They all come from certain parts of the world, which I'm sure there are many framework which you could have created, or some in Melbourne or Australia which have been created, but they don't see the day of the light, which is available for all
Mhm.
the entire testing community. Do you think there's work that as individuals we can do, and then probably use certain generic features that are available, that the current technology provides, so that we can make it available for all?
I mean, why not? Because the previous or the current solutions that we are using were developed by some individuals, right? So why not? We can also do it. But of course, it's not easy. Like everyone, of course, cannot do it, because we try to solve some problems, and these problems are meant to be solved in terms of a certain scope initially. But if somehow you figured out a global problem which is faced by everyone, and you can find a good solution for that, then the thing that you mentioned happens. But I guess it's not easy, but not impossible, I guess.
Right. So, I mean, platforms like Stag, like we have been around for quite some time, and then somewhere we, at least I had this thought process that we as a group should be able to create some solution which can be used by the entire community.
Mhm.
So, again, there hasn't been much work done, but then if anybody is keen and interested, I think Leon, whatever you have shared is quite interesting. I'm not sure if we can have a session on that, and then talk it out. Any solution which can be used by rest of the community would be great.
I think it's an excellent idea, but of course it requires some time, effort, and
Right.
motivation, of course. So
Right.
maybe making it open source can be a good idea as well.
Right. Because I myself had few solutions, but then I never made it available, because the moment you make it open source, you have to follow certain standards. It's not that you have written the code so you just make it available to everybody. You have to do certain checks and then make sure it
Yeah.
doesn't break certain things and whatnot before you make it available. But then as a community, probably we can come together and then we can create certain solutions. I don't know, Yura, what the link that you have shared. It looks
That's just my own website. Don't click on it. I have it on the screen.
okay.
You can share if you want.
No, I shared it in the chat as well. It's just the site that I'm developing. It's full of APIs. That's why I was asking if how you test APIs together with the site.
I see.
Okay, I don't know what you are testing and what you're doing, but it looks very intricate with all the graphs and all.
It's
Looks
just
like a heart
ECG cardiogram stuff.
Cardio, yeah.
Okay, wow. Okay, and where does Chat GPT fall into this? Anybody like?
I don't know. I played with it a little bit and
Mhm.
asked like interesting question, like relevant to work.
Mhm.
Like for example, I had some problem to solve. Simple, like for example, like just reading stuff from Excel, and like data driven from Excel values, and they gave me pretty good setup. Like first of all, step by step how to do it, and they gave me like almost like completed code. Which is like I was struggling to find. Like I was searching on the normal Google, like lots of links, and I could not find proper solution. Which is chat gave me at least something like very close to what I want.
It gives you even the test code. Like if you describe a scenario and ask to write in a specific language or with a specific tool, like write me a Cypress code, which goes to Google and search for a keyword, and then select the third page in the list, and then it gives you the code.
I agree to that. I have been using it very frequently now, and I find like it is saving a lot more time than just Googling into links, going here and there. And even if I'm not satisfied, it gives me a different example as well. So that till I'm satisfied, it gives me list of examples to understand properly. So I am getting big fan of Chat GPT now.
Yeah, it's a little bit scary, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Has anybody used it as code? Like I've not looked into that aspect. Like even I have played around with Chat GPT, but then if we can call it programmatically and then make it fix our program, or add some additional functionalities. Has anybody tried that?
Yeah, just an example, I want to add, if you know about the scenario outline in SpecFlow, I want to generate some good title to scenario outline, and it gives me an example like how you can do it.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I find it, yeah, it's quite useful if you have something in mind and you want to utilize it. And also for just generic topics, I was reading about some generic collection in C# or something like that, and it gave me a really good examples. So yeah, in those terms, it is quite useful, I feel.
Awesome.
I also heard that I think you can actually plug it into like an IntelliJ, for example, and but it's limited. I think only 2 months. Otherwise, you have to pay for the subscription. And apparently, it's very good for developers. See, I've seen one guy who's playing with it. It helps you to write and analyze your code and improve it. So
Right. And just on a lighter note, I know many manual testers feared automation testers because they thought we are putting them out of jobs. And now comes Chat GPT. They feel much more enlightened or empowered rather.
Yeah,
Cool.
true.
I
Yeah.
mean, we shouldn't be scared, I guess, because of course there can be a very good support from AI or machine learning modules.
Yeah.
It can be only a support. Like, why not, right? If we can get it, just have it. It will be a support and help, but it will not be replacing us, because especially in terms of testing, like development, maybe you can do in a point. But if you are doing the testing, we are already discussing about the functional and the non-functional operations. So we are discussing about the usability and the user friendliness. So we are talking about the users. So we are talking about the human aspect of the product. So especially that part is really challenging to be done by machine learning, I guess.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you once again, Mesut. That was a wonderful talk. And you know what? On the same note, probably we'll have the next session on Chat GPT and test automation.
Wow.
So looking forward to the speaker will be here in Melbourne probably, and if we'll see if we can have it in person, hopefully, and then Mesut and everybody who's outside Melbourne, they can probably join online. We'll have it online session as well, because lately we were usually we used to have in person, and due to lockdown we started having online, and maybe in coming days it'll be mix of both.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thanks again, Mesut, and thank you all for joining. I'll just stop recording and